Max Payne 3 is my favorite third-person shooter. I bought it when it came out and have been playing it on and off again ever since. However, I also consider it to be the greatest third-person shooter ever made. Now, when I say greatest ever, I am being somewhat hyperbolic. This is after all my very subjective opinion. What I think, however, is that Max Payne 3's individual parts come together so well, better than any other third-person shooter, that it becomes the best game of its kind I have played. To explain this, I'm going to break down the game into parts. I should make it clear, however, that my focus is going to be almost exclusively on gameplay. The story, music and setting of the game are all great, but those parts of the game have already been covered elsewhere. I will have some recommendations for videos about those parts at the end of this video. So let's take a look at these gameplay aspects, and I would like to begin with the shooting, the most important part of the game. To understand what makes the shooting so great, we need to look at how it works. The primary aspect that makes the shooting so good, as far as I see it, is that every weapon in the game is basically equally deadly. This comes down to the fact that all weapons are highly accurate, and regardless of weapon, with a few exceptions, headshots are always a one-shot kill on enemies without helmets. Now this may not sound special. Many shooters have one-shot headshot kills. Everything from Gears of War to Control has that, for select enemies at least. The reason I think this works especially well in Max Payne 3, however, comes down to a select few parts. First off is the consistency. Any and every weapon, be it the PT-92 you begin the game with up to the Desert Eagle you use at the very end, is equal in their power to get those one-shot kills. The caliber of the weapon doesn't matter. One shot in the head will always kill an enemy. The second part has to do with how accurate the weapons in the game are. The accuracy of guns is more affected by recoil rather than accuracy blooming as you fire. What this means in practice is that semi-auto weapons are more or less pinpoint accurate, whilst full auto weapons can be kept very accurate by tap-firing individual shots or shooting in very quick bursts. I also need to talk about the enemies. In general, they are pretty aggressive. They won't sit behind cover for too long and have a tendency to rush towards you in a suicidal manner, though this suicidal tendency varies between levels. Basically, they really like to move around. Shooting enemies basically anywhere but the head also becomes less and less viable as the game goes on. Enemies get more health as the game progresses, but later enemies wear body armor as well. That armor is very effective at soaking up bullets, meaning you basically have to get headshots on enemies who wear it. As I mentioned, helmets are an exception to headshot lethality. If an enemy wears one, you need to shoot it off in order to open them up for a headshot. At first glance, these helmet guys might come across as annoying. Due to the game's use of the Euphoria tech, enemies like to fall down a lot when you shoot them. For helmet guys, this means that they will often fall over when you shoot their helmet, knocking it off but leaving the guy alive. If you are clever with these guys, however, you can intentionally use this falling over tendency to put them out of the game for a few seconds whilst you focus on removing their helmetless friends. By the time that they get up, and assuming you are quick and with some luck, you will now be able to fully focus on giving their heads speed holes. What this helmet-no-helmet dynamic allows is to juggle enemies and prioritize threats so you don't have to take on a whole set of enemies at once. Playing the game this way will make it easier to keep moving and not wait behind cover as much. There is one enemy that changes up this whole headshot and knockdown dynamic, and that is the game's mini-bosses. These are big guys wearing helmets with face shields and wielding machine guns. There are only few encounters with these dudes in the game, and they are all terrible, frankly. Their helmets won't be shot off with just one bullet, so instead you have to unload into it until it falls off and you can get a headshot on them. They aren't fun to fight, especially the one you encounter during the end of the Oregon Farm Hotel, as it's collapsing can be real annoying. These boss fights suck, so I will just move on from them. To sum all of this info up, the very deadly and accurate guns, the aggressive enemies, the helmets and body armor, creates a game where fast but accurate shooting is key, especially on the higher difficulties. With old school being the best, though unfortunately it isn't available from the beginning of the game. When you fully get into the flow of it, the game truly turns into clicking heads in the best way possible. Also due to this, Max Payne 3 is a game that you more or less have to play on PC. Not only due to the much better performance you can achieve on that platform, but also because of mouse and keyboard. Playing Max Payne 3 with a controller is really not a good idea. The speed and accuracy you gain from a mouse is essential in getting those consistent headshots. So let's talk about how the game uses cover. Max Payne 3 does have a cover system like many other third-person games, but it's not a game where you want to be sitting behind one piece of cover for too long. Due to how aggressive enemies are, it's much better to face them head on, utilizing bullet time and shoot dodge to out-aggro the enemies and avoid getting stuck behind a single piece of cover for too long. That doesn't mean that the cover is useless, however. Cover in Max Payne 3 should be considered temporary. Sometimes this is literally the case, as the game does have destructible cover that you can't sit behind for too long. Most of the time, however, this isn't the case. Rather, the reason you should always move between cover, preferably moving forward or at least not backwards, is so you can keep up the aggression against the enemies. So that covers cover from a gameplay standpoint. But something I find more interesting about cover actually has to do with how it looks. Now this might sound strange. What do I mean when I say how cover looks? What I mean is that cover in Max Payne 3 is blended into an environment in such a way where it rarely stands out. It fits in the environment in a convincing way. Basically, the cover looks like it should be there, rather than something that has been plonked down in a very gamey way. The best way I can demonstrate this is with using examples from other games. The Uncharted games are a pretty good example of this, especially the first game. What I want you to focus on in this clip is this little stone wall that is in the middle of this, walkway on top of this castle. Now in this environment you can see these big random rocks just placed down as pieces of cover. When I look at it, it makes me wonder, why is that wall? Because it clearly is a wall that is built, it's just not random debris. Why is it just in the middle of this walkway? Why would that be built there? It just seems strange to have a little wall that is built right in the middle of this walkway like that. It just seems like it would be in the way. Sure, for you as a player, it's convenient cover. But if you try to think about this environment as a real environment, it just seems really out of place. The bigger rocks do also look kind of weird. Sure, they are debris, so it makes more sense than random walls. But it's still like, okay, where do they come from? What did they fall off from? It just, again, seems like a bunch of random rocks that just ended up there that now are convenient cover, but again, why is it there? It just looks off. I can also think of some other examples, such as this from Mass Effect 2. With this Mass Effect 2 clip, it's kind of the same thing as the Uncharted clip. Similarly here, there's just all these random rocks that are placed down here that, again, you seem very much like it's placed there because it's cover for you as the player, but it doesn't really consider why any of that would be there in the environment. Maybe it's not as weird as the example from Uncharted perhaps, but still, I look at that and it just looks a bit wonky, at least as far as I see it. There are more examples of this from the games that I brought up, but I think you get it. None of this is a game-breaking issue, but I find it cool that with Max Payne 3, even the cover seemed to have been thought out about how it should fit within the environment, not just how it should work from a gameplay perspective. There is a downside to this, however, as there are some parts of the game where cover is quite limited due to this dedication to making its placement in the environment convincing. On the other hand, this could be seen as an intentional choice to get the player to keep moving rather than stopping and starting behind repeated cover. I want to talk for a bit about movement. It is, for better or worse, quite unique to this game. The movement is by no means without fault, but I still love how it feels. Max is pretty heavy in this game, much more so than the previous two games. He is, however, not as weighty as, say, Isaac from Dead Space or any of the fridges that you control in Gears of War. Those characters have a heavy but also very stiff movement. With those characters, I feel like the weight is very artificial. The best way I can describe how Max feels to control is that it feels like a guy who was once much more athletic, has let himself go, but still hasn't lost all of his ability, which fits with the story of the game, if anything. Max is agile, but in a way that feels fairly realistic, unlike the bouncy and floaty way characters in games such as, say, Uncharted or Tomb Raider feel. His different moves blend and fit into each other naturally. In some ways, it's actually similar to the Skate games, specifically Skate 2 and 3. What made the Skate games compelling to me is how natural the movement feels. The excessively magnetized feel of something like the Tony Hawk games always put me off them. It just made them feel too rigid. While Skate does have a certain level of magnetization as well, it's far less intense. That, along with animation that prioritizes realism over snappy gameplay, makes those games harder but also much more satisfying to play. Obviously, Max Payne 3's movement doesn't feel like the Skate games. but they have similarities in the sense that they don't magnetize the movement and the jumping. In other games, like for example John Woo's Stranglehold or the game Wet, you see a lot of that magnetization towards objects as you jump around. That might help the player in pulling off cool looking moves, but it also makes the process so easy that it really isn't very fun or feel particularly satisfying. This weightiness to the movement is what makes it so satisfying to play as Max. It's not a game that immediately gives you what you want, but once you learn the in and outs of how Max controls, it feels amazing to play. Where this movement fails is with a rather strange issue that mostly happens when moving in and out of cover or when making a lot of small, quick movements. What basically happens is that Max will move on his own, usually to the left or right, without any input from the player. That movement isn't a part of some sort of set of animations, he just moves for no reason. I really don't know why this happens, but when it does it can be pretty annoying and lead to you taking damage or sometimes even getting killed. It doesn't happen too often, but it is nonetheless a problem. While it's not directly related to movement, something I found when playing this game is that shoulder switching is essential in combat. Being able to switch the camera from the right shoulder to the left and vice versa isn't unique to this game, but I haven't played any other game where I do it as frequently as I do in this game. I found that binding the shoulder switch key to one of the side buttons on my mouse works best. I should also add that the roll move is very useful and should not be ignored just because of the more notable jump dodge move. The roll is useful for getting in and out of cover, but it's also very good for dodging bullets, more so than the actual dodge move. To sum this up, it isn't that Max Payne 3 is mechanically unique, it's just that what it does better than any other game, in my opinion. It is also a kind of game that I don't think we'll see again. Rockstar is at this point arguably the GTA studio, more or less. The kind of interesting games that once came out of that studio, mainly during the 6th and 7th console generation, is something that they have by all accounts left behind. Max Payne 3 was Rockstar focusing their attention to detail on a linear game and then spending around $100 million on it. The development of the game was by no means unproblematic, but what we got out of it was a game that feels surprisingly distinctive for a game with that budget and from that studio. It is a level of admittedly moderate risk-taking that you wouldn't expect from a game that had that amount of money poured into it. The following games Rockstar released afterwards, mainly GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, more or less threw out the gameplay feel from Max Payne 3, which is somewhat surprising since both of those games have slow motion abilities. At least RDR2 kept the whole carry long gun in left hand while shooting pistol in right hand thing. That will just never not look cool to me, it is seriously just so fucking badass looking. As I promised at the beginning of the video, I have some recommendations for videos and one podcast that go more to the story, setting and music of the game. The video Ugly Games by Jacob Geller not only has a great look at Max Payne 3, but also covers another really good game, Kane and Lynch 2. The follow-up podcast that Geller made along with Blake Hester, called Something Rotten, is also worth a listen. I don't agree with everything they say in that podcast series, but overall it's quite good. As for the music, the channel Liam Triforce has a great video called Understanding the Music of Max Payne 3 that covers the music of the game, how it was made, how it fits in the game and so forth. It's very much worth a watch. As I was working on this video, the news came out that James McCaffrey had passed away. He was the voice of Max Payne, but also characters in many other Remedy games, such as Thomas Zane in the first Alan Wake, or Zachariah Trench in Control. He was a great actor and, by all accounts, a great person. He will be missed. So, that's the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've been wanting to make stuff like this for a while, and only now gotten around to actually making something. I have a bunch of ideas for more videos, but I can't really say when any of those will be coming out. But in the meantime, thank you for watching.
I've got anything to do with it.